At some point, every marketer running a branded podcast ends up in the same meeting. Leadership wants to know if it's worth it. And suddenly, you're sitting across from your boss, and they're asking you to justify the investment. The good news? There are really only 3 key questions that come up in that conversation. And if you have the right data, all 3 of them are actually pretty easy to answer. Let me walk you through them. The first thing your leadership wants to know about the brand's podcast is who's in the audience. Not how many downloads, but who is actually listening. Are these people in our ICP? Are they the decision makers we're trying to reach? Or are we talking to a random mix of people outside of our market? This used to be a really hard question to answer confidently, especially for B2B brands. But audience level data changes that completely. In co-host, you can see exactly who's listening: the companies, the industries, the job functions, the seniority levels. So instead of saying, we had 2,000 downloads last month, you can walk into that meeting and say, our audience is 70% senior marketers and revenue leaders at mid-market B2B companies. Here's the breakdown. That's a completely different answer, and it's one your leadership team will actually care about. Your leadership is also likely going to be asking, is the podcast generating any pipeline? So basically, how is the podcasting impacting bottom line performance? This is the one that makes most marketers sweat a little when it comes to podcast reporting. Because historically, connecting podcast listenership to actual pipeline growth has been almost impossible. The data just wasn't there. But here's what's changed. Let me jump back into co-host. When you can see which companies are listening and how often, you can start cross-referencing that against your target account list. And when you see that a company has had multiple people tuning in across several episodes, that's a signal. That's an account that's actively engaged with your brand and thinking. In co-host, you can filter your listener data by company size, industry, job function, and episode. So you can pull a list of the accounts that are most active and hand that directly to your sales team as warm context. Additionally, you can sync co-host directly to your Salesforce account, allowing you to pass listener data like company, job role, seniority, and engagement data to your CRM so you can connect existing prospects to the podcast more easily, or identify new prospects for your sales team to reach out to. Being able to say, these 12 target accounts have been consistently listening, and 3 of them are already in late-stage pipeline, or we've successfully identified 10 new prospects that have entered our ABM program this quarter, are very meaningful outcomes. What is the ROI of the podcast? The big question that many marketers get. An ROI on a podcast is genuinely tricky, I won't pretend otherwise. But the reason it feels unanswerable for most teams is that they're trying to measure it the same way they'd measure a paid ad, and that's not the right framework. A podcast builds trust over time. It creates touch points with buyers who are in research mode. It keeps your brand in the room during a long B2B sales cycle. It creates new prospects for your sales teams. Those things have real business value. They're just harder to put an exact number on. But what you can do is start to build the case with the data you do have. The story you bring into that meeting with leadership looks something like this. Here's who's listening and how they match our ICP. Here are the accounts that have shown up consistently. Here's how our content is actually being consumed, not just downloaded. And here are the pipeline conversations that started with a podcast touchpoint. You may not have a clean ROI number, but you have a credible, data-backed narrative. And in a lot of organizations, that's enough to keep the budget. The thing all 3 of these questions have in common is that they're only hard to answer if you don't have the right data. And getting that data doesn't have to be complicated. Co-host is built to give B2B podcast teams exactly this: the audience intelligence and analytics to walk into any leadership conversation with confidence. If you want to see what that looks like for your B2B podcast, we'd love to walk you through it. Check out the link in the description to book a demo with co-host.